Hi, everyone. How's it going? Welcome back to Soccerex TV. We have a special guest today. Ben Jacobs, sports broadcaster and transfer guru, has joined us on this very special 24-hour period that we find ourselves in. How you doing, Ben?
I'm very well. You know, when Soccerex made their big announcement, I was one of 11 going to Miami, and I thought, great, it's finally my moment. And then about a week later, I've been trumped by another certain somebody making a move to Miami who is a whole lot bigger than I am.
Yes, we're very excited to see that Miami is going to be the place to be for 2023. And jumping right into that topic, of course, Lionel Messi announces yesterday that he is joining Inter Miami, a move that is seismic both for MLS and the transfer market as a whole. How do you see him going to MLS, maybe legitimizing the move to the league, but also maybe potentially shifting how certain players are going to approach their own moves in the transfer market?
I think it is seismic, as you rightly say, for football in not just North America, but North Central and South America. And with the World Cup on the horizon in 2026, Messi's going to have the opportunity to really grow football. And if we're getting a bit geeky and thinking about things from the business point of view and away from the transfers, the last time America hosted a World Cup, there wasn't the legacy that perhaps would have been expected. And now there's an opportunity to have a build up to the World Cup and use Messi as part of that. And then, of course, a legacy after it. And it's obvious that Messi, from a football and commercial point of view, is going to be massive for MLS, for football more broadly. And you only have to look, for example, at Inter Miami's Instagram following, which was at about 800,000 an hour before the news was confirmed. And at the time we're recording this, is pushing 5 million. That is exactly what Messi does. And Inter Miami and MLS and players can all be inspired by that, can all benefit from that. And I think that the Inter Miami offer is very novel from a business perspective, because it isn't just a football offer on the table that earns Messi a salary and allows him to keep playing. There also is the ability for Messi to prepare for life after football as well. And what that means is that commercially, Adidas and Apple are part of the deal, and MLS collectively, so all of the clubs, are pushing for his arrival and longevity, ideally within MLS. And that might, for example, as with David Beckham, eventually end up in a franchise opportunity too. So what Messi gets from this deal is the ability to keep playing. There might potentially be overlap whereby he can actually have a gap in the calendar and still have the opportunity to offer himself to a European team. It will all depend on Messi and also how well Inter Miami do. But we've seen this before with players who, like David Beckham and Thierry Henry, have gone over to MLS and been loaned out. So that could be at the back of his mind in the long term as well. And then I think that it's really important to understand why Messi moved too, if we come back to the transfer itself. And he did not have a formal offer from Barcelona. And despite all of the smoke around how much they wanted him and that they were pushing, one of the most telling things is when Jorge Messi met with Joan Laporta and came out afterwards and said, quote, "It's an option for Messi to go to Barcelona." It wasn't at that point, because in that meeting, he had actually informed Laporta before he said that Messi was moving to Inter Miami. So Barcelona billed this as Messi wants to return. Messi might play for free or for peanuts. We really want to bring him back. We owe him a moral debt because of the manner in which he left the football club. But financially, it was never feasible. It was never close, which is why they never tabled a formal offer. And it's really easy to get caught up in the Messi to Barcelona. But when actually delving into it with sources, the reality was clear that Barcelona were not waiting for what was often wrongly referred to as a La Liga approval. There's two aspects that La Liga had in this transfer, but more broadly for Barcelona. One is the 2-year financial viability plan. And that's not an approval. That's Barcelona, because they've activated these levers, having to put down a 2-year plan. And all La Liga really do is review it, not approve it. And then Barcelona sign it. And after they've signed it, if they don't stick to it, they're sanctioned. So that's not really a green light for Messi. And then more importantly, Barcelona were waiting for the squad cost limit. And that is more significant because Barcelona, as I understand it, it's not official at the time of recording, are around 200 million euros over the squad cost limit. So what that means is they can only spend 40% on transfers and wages for incoming players from income into the club. So when you then consider Messi, it is almost impossible to afford him and register him. And people will say, well, free transfer, why can he not just take a low wage? The problem with that is there's then financial manipulation on top. So every time a formal offer is made in Barcelona's current climate, it goes to an independent panel of experts and they review over 100 articles of criteria to come up with a minimum salary number. And that is what Barcelona, at a minimum, must pay. Otherwise, it would have been construed as financial manipulation. So when you add all of that up, Barcelona was near impossible. And then in the end, Messi chose Inter Miami because even though the Saudi offer was lucrative, he felt that it was a better move for him and his family.
Right. So, like you said, shifting over from one team and league that is counting their dollars to Saudi, who, as we've seen with Ronaldo, Benzema, and N'Golo Kante, they're willing to spend huge. And that's all well and good. But so far, all their transfers have been free transfers. Do you see the Saudi league going and trying to go the route of the Chinese Super League a few years ago? We're actually splashing big cash at clubs and luring away players in their middle to late primes. Or do you think that they're going to have to keep with this model for the near future?
I think the Saudi model is long term. So this is only stage one and it's opportunism. Who can they get now and quickly? And elite names are very important. There's around 20 targets. And in an ideal world, Saudi Arabia want to distribute these players quite evenly throughout the league. But the priority, because this is PIF led, and they're of course also the owners of Newcastle United, is 4 clubs in particular. And that's 2 from Riyadh and 2 from Jeddah. And if they can build Riyadh and Jeddah rivalries, then from there, after populating those 4 clubs, they can move on to others throughout the league as well. And Al Ittihad in Jeddah have become a priority because they're playing in the 2023 Club World Cup. So it's no coincidence that Kante and Benzema are going there because Saudi Arabia are hosting the 2023 Club World Cup and Al Ittihad won the league. So they will be the representative from Saudi Arabia. And there's a real desire for them not only to be strong on the field, but have star names. And then more broadly, you're going to see in the next 6 months or so, new global deals in the Saudi league on the broadcast side and on the sponsorship side as they start to globalize. And to do that and to cash in and get the money that they need, obviously, these names are very important. And they are older. And as you rightly say, they're free transfers at this point. But Riyad Mahrez, for example, is one to watch, another target at the moment. And he would require a fee from Manchester City. With Kante, yes, he is still in his 30s, but he's not quite a 37-year-old Ronaldo or a 35-year-old Messi. Heung-min Song in 2024, who could leave Tottenham at the end of the season, would also be at the lower end. So it's easy to see what they're doing, which is populating with star power, which is similar in some respects to the Chinese Super League. And then from there, stage 2 will actually be to target perhaps a level of players below the Messi, Ronaldo's, Benzema's, which will allow them to have a higher volume. And that will also increase the standard. And that's kind of stage 2. And they'll still be older. But along with these 20 star names, some are feasible now and some aren't. There's another 50 names that are still top players, but perhaps not quite in the same bracket as a Benzema or a Messi, even though they failed to get him, or a Cristiano Ronaldo. Sergio Busquets is still one to watch. There's interest in him from MLS as well. And I think that if that volume is there, then you're suddenly going to see an improvement in standard, but also a change in dressing rooms. And by that, I mean, when you have a league in Saudi with predominantly Saudi players or those from the Middle East, there's one way of doing things. And you have to be respectful of the climate and also the culture. So training takes place very late, matches kick off very late, and it can be difficult if you're one of the pioneers to change that culture. So one of the things Saudi Arabia are offering is, if you're Benzema, who else do you want? Who else will you feel comfortable with? Who else is going to elevate your game? So we're going to see players being part of this process. And this is all with a broad aim of fulfilling Saudi sports vision, which ultimately is about bringing sport to Saudi Arabia, creating jobs through sport, and not having a reliance on the oil or gas industry. From a sports point of view, it's also about building up to trying to win the 2030 World Cup. And then for balance, even though I've told you about the vision side, which is what the Saudis would argue, there is, of course, that sports washing element. And we need to, as journalists, mention that and give that scrutiny as well. So the Saudis will argue it's a vision. Those that are more cynical will argue that it's sports washing. And it might be a little bit of everything, to be perfectly honest with you. There's a lot that Saudi Arabia are doing that is very forward thinking, that's very bullish, that's very positive. And when it's backed by money, it can lead to things like at Newcastle United, where PIF have been able to take Newcastle from a team that were threatened by relegation to one that have qualified for the Champions League. But there's also the fact that these deals for players are not just football deals. They encompass commercial rights. They encompass things like partnerships with Saudi tourism, which again, Saudi would say, why shouldn't we use top football stars in order to promote tourism? But as journalists, we need to look at both sides and not only understand the future and how rosy that might look, but also the past as well, and make sure that we don't just forget about that simply because all of these big names are arriving to Saudi Arabia. So it's looking very healthy for the Saudi Pro League. They'll be extraordinarily disappointed they've not got Messi. I can tell you that he toured Al Hilal, that he was shown accommodation options, that the terms were obviously acceptable if he gave the green light, but he never signed anything. But Saudi Arabia were confident to the point where they were talking to agencies about announcement videos. They had a private jet on standby in case Messi needed to get over there to finalize the deal. So they were very advanced, but Messi never at any point said, yes, I am joining. He simply said, yes, the terms are acceptable. Yes, I'm interested. Yes, I want to know more. And then, unfortunately for Saudi Arabia, they were made to wait. And at which point, when Messi decided Barcelona was definitely off the table, he very quickly picked into Miami.
As an ambassador for the country, do you think that door's closed, or do you think there's still always a possibility that even in 3 years' time, when he's 38, he could always go there and still play in that situation?
I think it's unlikely because seemingly Messi wants to play first MLS, and who knows whether there's a loan possibility in Europe. And by that stage, he'll be in a position where maybe he's too old to make another move. This is presuming it all works out with Inter Miami. Then there's a pathway there clearly and hopefully beyond even any deal that he signs, with a view to going right up until the 2026 World Cup and maybe even beyond it as well. And this is what the Messi camp do very well. They keep everything on their terms. So there will be opportunities to extend. And we saw that with PSG as well, where even though he left on a free transfer in the old contract, even though it was never triggered, there was an option to extend by a further year as well. So I think it would be ambitious for Saudi Arabia to presume that after Inter Miami, there would be a football move to Saudi Arabia. But I think that Messi will continue to be heavily involved with Saudi Arabia away from football. As you rightly say, he's an ambassador for their tourism authority. Because Argentina are looking to get the World Cup in 2030, it's not believed that he'll be a part of any pitch for the World Cup. But we saw this with David Beckham as well, where there was no desire to be part of the pitch before a World Cup was won. But if it's won, then you can pivot. So Beckham was very distanced from anything Qatar when they were still trying to win. But as soon as the World Cup came around, then he was a part of it. And he was paid to have his face and his voice affiliated to Qatar 2022. And there'll be the same opportunity for Messi as well. But it's contingent on them winning first. There's no opportunity to use Messi in the build-up because he'll be driving and backing a World Cup in Argentina. So I expect Saudi Arabia to continue, if you like, to do business with Messi. But I think that at this stage, it's going to be very difficult for them to get him to join a club after Inter Miami, because Messi said as well that his desire is to settle eventually back in Barcelona. He will go back there one day. So logically, it seems like Messi's pathway for after football is Miami first, and then to go back to Barcelona, where he settles and then starts to think about life after football.
It's kind of crazy that we haven't even spoken about Europe yet. After the heart of the transfer market, and Jude Bellingham just goes under the radar, it seems, from Dortmund to Real Madrid. We knew this was going to happen for a long time, but here we are. He's one of the biggest transfers. What is your take on, one, this massive transfer, and two, what are some of the other maybe 60, 70, 80 million pound transfers that we might see over the next few weeks?
Well, Bellingham's a fantastic bit of business for Real Madrid. It might not seem like that when you only look at the 103 million euros fee, and then there's up to 30% in bonuses as well. So it's a huge amount of money. It's up there with Real's biggest ever transfers. It will just depend how much of the bonuses are eventually activated. But anyone that's seen Bellingham knows that he's not just a fantastic footballer, but a tremendous leader and character as well. So Real Madrid have always wanted Bellingham, and their approach on this was really quite simple. They didn't want Bellingham to extend at Dortmund, because if he did so, there might have been a release clause number that priced them out of the race compared to Premier League interest. This was 6 months ago, before Manchester City and Liverpool cooled off. And then they were hoping to get Bellingham for under 100 million euros. So they were 3 million out there, plus the bonuses on top, but it's still in keeping, roughly speaking, with what Real wanted to pay. And one of the reasons for that is because Liverpool walked away and Manchester City, in the end, never made as big a push as was expected. So there wasn't a bidding war. I think if you speak to Dortmund when the dust settles, they would have much preferred those two Premier League clubs to either be in the race or stay in the race, and then be able to get 10 or 15 million more. So Real will be very content with the deal. And one of the reasons why they've been able to pull this off and quickly is because Bellingham wanted the move. Now, he was also very interested in the Liverpool project as well, but that option was taken off the table because Liverpool don't have Champions League football, and they've decided to put their budget towards other targets rather than have a situation where they'd gambled on Bellingham and it had dragged out. And I think the reason why it's been done so quickly from Real's perspective is because Liverpool decided to exit the race. So it's a tremendous bit of business for Real Madrid. And now they'll have to work out what budget they have left, because were they to move for Harry Kane or Kai Havertz is another possibility. And in the long term, if they still want Kylian Mbappe as well, who would come with very high wages, they're going to have to balance their budget. And this is one of the kind of things about a transfer window that people don't always realize. It isn't just about the target and the value for one player. You got to look at your collective budget. And if you move for one player, does that price you out in terms of going for another? And is the priority bringing in two or three, or just getting the one? And I think that's what Liverpool feel, that they would rather get two or three for the same, in inverted commas, Bellingham budget than have gambled on getting Bellingham and maybe still not got Jude Bellingham. Other names to look out for in the 60 million or so mark, I think Mason Mount is a big one. There's a high probability that he leaves Chelsea, even though Mauricio Pochettino and Bedag Egbali and Todd Boehly would like to keep him. Chelsea have always said that they'd make a final attempt to try and get Mount to extend at the end of the season, but the feeling within the Mount camp is that he would like a new opportunity at this stage. It's still relatively fluid. And if Chelsea do decide that they are in selling mode because they're basically informed that Mount won't sign anything, then it's all just going to come down to price. And here's where it gets interesting, because Arsenal, Liverpool, Manchester United have all looked at Mount. The feeling is that Mount's leaning towards Manchester United, but there is a gulf of at least 15 or 20 million in terms of valuation between what Chelsea want to sell Mount for and what Manchester United want to pay. Manchester United want under 60 million, if not under 55 million. And Chelsea are looking for somewhere in the region of 75 million pounds. And given Mount's contractual situation, that is a very high valuation. So in theory, Chelsea could say, no one's met the valuation. We're going to force Mount to see out the final year of his contract and then risk losing him on a free transfer, and maybe hope that what will happen in that year is that Mount will fall in love with the Pochettino project. But I think that it's risky because we know that Chelsea need fees and we know that Chelsea need to reduce their squad size. And I think this is why Manchester United are hopeful that the price will come down. But like I said before about taking that collective approach rather than only looking at transfers individually, if Mount goes to Manchester United for 75 million, that might mean that they can't go Mount plus Kim or Mount plus Højlund. Whereas if Mount goes to Manchester United for 50, 55 million, then there's still that budget available to Manchester United to bring in another player. And Manchester United are in a difficult position because there's ownership uncertainty, because they're still quite tightly bound by financial fair play, even with Champions League football. So I can see a situation where Manchester United really push for Mount and Erik ten Hag really wants Mount, but it is ultimately going to come down to price.
So we'll leave you with this. We know you're a busy man. What is, from your perspective, what it's like to actually work through a transfer window and as a journalist? So obviously, I'm sure your WhatsApp is constant. I'm sure you're getting DMs constantly. What to you helps you get to the point where you're ready to announce something versus when you're hearing all the chatter and you're seeing it all yourself, even just coming from different social sites?
The rule of thumb is be right, don't be first. And there's two ways of doing it. You can try and break the exclusives, and there's a lot of people in the industry fighting for that. And then once the story is out, there's all of the detail and the backstory around it, and both are important. But I think what people often fail to understand is that it's not the journalists that are unreliable, it's the transfer window itself. And 99% of deals are not as clear cut as maybe fans presume. Everyone wants black and white. The player's our top priority. Everyone's aware of what the fee is. Why haven't we signed the player? But when you move in a transfer window, there will always be other suitors. There will always be twists to the financials. There will always be smoke and mirrors. So as a journalist with many transfers, I hear two sides and even 5 or 6 sides, because you've not just got the buyer and the seller, you've got the player, you've got the player's agent, you've got executives close to the football club, and then you've got other sources that are very familiar with certain transfers, maybe because they're part of the player's entourage or family or friendship group. And it's very important as a journalist to either get somebody on record, so then right or wrong, they're on record. Over the course of the January window, I had interviewed Paul Barber at Brighton, and he had said that Moises Caicedo is not for sale at this point. So had Caicedo gone, then Barber would have either been wrong or misleading, but ultimately he was on record. So everything he said was accurate at the time to his knowledge. And because he said it, I was able to report that, and it's his words. And that's the best case scenario. We'd love it as journalists if every single time we had a transfer rumor, somebody just came on record and spoke about it. But that is just not the reality of what is a business transaction and is far more secretive. With Mykhailo Mudryk, the interview I did with him, he said, it's going to be hard to say no to Arsenal. But again, he's a Chelsea player now. So that's another example. So I think the key when somebody's not on record is, first of all, to protect your sources and respect them, and then to show balance. And sometimes you do have to sit on the fence a bit more and report both sides, because the two sides are telling you very different things, and that is part of the story. So where television or podcasts like this are helpful is you get the full context and you can listen and consume and understand the window better. But social media wants one sentence telling you where somebody's going. And it can be unhelpful because things change by the minute, hour, day, month. Manuel Ugarte is another good example that I can tell you, whereby Chelsea came in very optimistic and PSG were in the race. And then as I broke exclusively, Chelsea pulled out of the race for Ugarte and said that they were not prepared to pay above market value specifically for the players' package, and that PSG had somehow come in with a lucrative offer that meant that it wasn't worth Chelsea's while. And Sporting backed that up as well. But then the PSG side spoke about how they never made a new offer. The player was already in Paris. They didn't budge on what they offered, and that Chelsea tried a more innovative and what PSG called questionable structure to try and persuade Sporting to put pressure on Ugarte to join Chelsea over PSG. And there's two sides to that. And the French media reported one side and the English media reported the other side. And as a journalist, you go to sources you trust and you believe them. And you're aware that nobody is intentionally trying to mislead you. So with that kind of story, you have to gather both sides and say, listen, Chelsea are saying this, PSG are saying this. But it's ultimately water under the bridge because the players joined PSG. So the story I was able to break there was just that Chelsea had pulled out. And as a consequence, he was going to PSG. Why Chelsea pulled out can be debated, but they've pulled out. Chelsea have moved on. They're looking at a player like Moises Caicedo. PSG have moved on. They've got their player. So there's also a bit of a rewriting in retrospect by all clubs, the buyer, the seller, the failed suitor, because it doesn't matter once it's done. The player's moved. So you, as a journalist, you don't want to rush things. You want to make sure that you're confident. And if you're not confident, you got to present all sides. And again, the key things are, if you can get someone on record, great. If you're unsure, you don't jump the gun. Full context is vital. It's not just about a sentence. It's never usually black and white. Look at Messi. So much swirling around. He's going back to Barcelona. He's not going back to Barcelona. He's definitely signing for Saudi. He's not signing for Saudi. Actually, he's just announced he's going to Inter Miami. So for all of the headlines, for all of the words, for all of the reporting, it was actually better throughout the process, as I did, to explain why La Liga rules are likely to stop Barcelona signing Messi, but point out that Barcelona would still love to sign Messi, but it's unlikely. Point out the Saudi offer was lucrative, but make it clear that Inter Miami had an offer. Now, maybe at the time people would have said, but you're not telling us where he's going to go. But the reason why there was no indication is because at that stage, it was very unclear. There were a lot of games being played. And guess what? Messi hadn't decided. And there was the PSG factor for large parts of the year and a potential renewal there as well. So I think that it's very difficult as a journalist because we're dealing with an unreliable transfer window. And I like to be insightful. I like people to understand the window better. And I like to make sure that if I can't get somebody on record, and it's not a simple exclusive, like with Agate and Chelsea just pulling out and then moving to PSG, the balance is key. So I'm respectful to all sides. And that's how I approach it. Obviously, everybody's different. And it's harder, I think, for a writer, because a writer's words are there. They're printed. They're on the back page of a paper. You can't scrub them out. I think as a broadcaster, we can speak now and I can give you the context. And if something changes tomorrow, I can come back on and I can tell you why the context has changed. And over time, you learn that trust. But with a writer, somebody might just keep reposting, retweeting the article from yesterday. And I think that's kind of harder. And this is why I also try and be multi-platform. Sometimes I write, sometimes I broadcast, sometimes I engage on social media, because then fan bases trust you directly. You can write something out in more thought out words and you can speak in the moment. And obviously what I'm telling you now is not as thought out because I'm talking, not writing. So I might say a word and then I might listen back and I might say, I wish I'd said optimism, not confidence about a certain transfer. But that's just the reality of being on the spot. So there's different aspects to all of this. But I think anyone following the window, this is my advice anyway, think about it in two ways. If you love the drama, then follow it every day. But expect twists and turns and shocks, even if you think a lot of deals are definite. And if you don't like all of that because you're frustrated in hearing one thing one day and the next thing another day, then go to bed, put your club notifications on and wait for your football club to announce the deal and get a good night's sleep. And that's my advice to everybody. Either ride the roller coaster or get off it, go to bed, get a night's sleep. And when your phone pings, it will be your club telling you who you've signed. And it just depends on what your disposition is. Some people love the rumor and the plot leading to a transfer. And other fans just pull their hair out because they just want to know whether or not it's a done deal. And it's kind of irresponsible journalism to jump the gun. If the player doesn't know yet, then we as journalists don't know yet. So all we can do is report on the story Sometimes we're lucky and it is a bit simpler, but a lot of the time it's a murky, unreliable area, and we're braced for changes constantly. And that, unfortunately, is just the reality, but also the joy of the transfer window.
Well, Ben, it's been a joy listening to you break down all this. We really appreciate it. We know that there's going to be a lot more twists and turns that come on, but we're looking forward to having you out in Miami for Soccerex this November to continue to share all these perspectives with us. So thank you for all you've done and all you'll do with us, and enjoy Istanbul.
Looking forward to the Champions League final. Looking forward to Soccerex in Miami as well. Thanks for having me.